Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are grappling with a set of ideas that, I have to be honest, I found a little unsettling when I first read through them.
They are unsettling, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's one of those topics where, once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. It changes how you watch the news, how you read a fundraising email, everything.
And it starts with a premise that just feels completely backward to my intuition. Usually, if I see a problem like a social injustice, my gut says, okay, I need to prove how bad it is.
Right. Bring the receipts.
Exactly. I need to document the pain, the trauma, to get people to care enough to actually fix it. That just feels like the logical first step.
And that is the standard operating procedure for almost all social change work. The logic is, pretty simple. If I can show you the damage, you'll be morally compelled to intervene.
But today's deep dive suggests that this very instinct, this obsession with documenting brokenness, might actually be a trap. We're unpacking a really seminal open letter from 2009 by a scholar named Eve Tuck. It's titled Suspending Damage, A Letter to Communities.
And this is a foundational text in Indigenous studies. Eve Tuck is Anangas, and she was writing specifically to Indigenous communities and researchers. But we're talking about it today because we're cross-referencing her work with a new analysis on interfaith peacebuilding.
Which seems like a big jump at first, but the connection is actually really, really tight. We're looking at how her warning applies to religious conflict and polarization today.
Exactly. The mission is to figure out why defining a community by its pain is so dangerous, and to understand what on earth Tuck means by a desire-based framework.
And look, just clear the air before we start, because I know what some listeners might be thinking. This isn't toxic positivity, is it? We're not saying just ignore the suffering.
Not at all. And that is the hardest part of this to grasp. This isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about refusing to let the not fine parts be the only definition of who you are.
Okay, so let's get into the gears of this. Tuck coins this term, damage-centered research. Can you break that down for us?
It's a bit more specific than just any research that talks about bad things. Tuck defines it as research that operates, even with the best intentions, from a specific theory of change.
Okay.
The idea is that you intentionally document pain and brokenness, specifically to hold power accountable. You establish harm to get reparation.
Which, to be fair, sounds like a solid strategy. It sounds like a lawsuit. Oof. You hurt me, here's the proof, now pay up.
That's exactly what it is. The source material calls this the litigation model. Think about it. If you're in a personal injury case, you don't walk into court talking about how great your life is.
No, you bring the medical bills. You show the jury the cast on your leg. You have to perform your brokenness to get paid.
Right. And history shows this works, to a point. The sources mention Brown v. Board of Education. That's the holy grail of civil rights litigation.
For sure. And they bring up the famous Clark-Doll test used in that case.
Yeah, from the 1940s. Researchers showed black children a white doll and a black doll and asked which one was nice or bad.
I've seen footage of that. It is absolutely heartbreaking.
It's gut-wrenching. And Thurgood Marshall used that data to argue that segregation wasn't just unfair, it was psychologically damaging these children. He proved the injury, and he won.
So I'm going to play skeptic here for a second.
Yeah.
If it worked for Thurgood Marshall, if it ended legal segregation, why is Eve Tuck saying we need to suspend it? Why fix what isn't broken?
Because the courtroom is a very specific place. And when you take that litigation logic out of the courtroom and apply it to an entire community's identity for decades, things start to get toxic.
How so?
Because it pathologizes them. That's the key word she uses.
Pathologizing, like from pathology. It sounds medical.
It is. It treats the community like a chronic disease case. If the only time you hear about a community is in the context of their suffering or their poverty or their trauma, you stop seeing them as people and start seeing them as patients, as permanently broken.
I see. It's the difference between saying, I have a broken leg and I have a broken person.
Exactly that. And in the interfaith and peace-building world, which is the other half of our source material, this is just rampant. Think about how we talk about conflict zones.
Oh, I've seen the grant proposals. They always start with the casualty counts. They start with hate crime statistics. It's just pages and pages of look how much everyone hates each other.
Precisely. It's a catalog of despair. And the assumption is, if I show the donor how awful it is, they'll give us money to fix it. But the source argues that when we do this, we strip these communities of their complexity.
Can you give an example of what that stripping away looks like?
Well, just look at how major religions get discussed in the media during conflicts. We risk reducing Judaism solely to the Holocaust or the events of October 7th,
Right.
or reducing Islam solely to post-9/11 security threats, or Christianity in the global South just to the wounds of colonization.
And those things are so real. You can't just pretend the Holocaust or colonization didn't happen.
No, and Tuck is very clear about this. This is not amnesia. But she asks a crucial question. If that is the only story we tell, is that history? Or is that an act of aggression?
An act of aggression. That's strong language.
It is, but think about it. If I introduce you to someone and I say, this is so-and-so, they were the victim of a terrible crime, and that's all I say, I've just defined you by the worst thing that ever happened to you.
You've robbed me of my agency. You've made me a character in someone else's tragedy, not the protagonist of my own life.
Exactly.
Okay, that clicks.
Ugh.
So if we fall into this damage trap, what's the alternative? This is where she brings in the desire-based framework.
Right. And we have to be really careful with that word desire, because in English we usually think of, wanting a slice of pizza or something.
Yeah, I desire a vacation right now.
Me too.
Yeah.
But Tuck is drawing on some heavier philosophy here, Deleuze and Guattari. And in this framework, desire isn't about lack. It's not, I want what I don't have. It's what she calls an assemblage.
Okay, you're going to have to translate assemblage for us. That sounds a little like art school jargon.
It does a bit. Think of it as a generative accumulation, a mosaic. It's the sum total of your wisdom, your hope, your contradictions, your heritage, and your pain. The source has this great quote, "Desire accounts for the loss and despair, but also the visions and the wisdom of lived lives."
So damage is a snapshot of the wound, but desire is the whole movie.
That's a perfect way to put it. To make this concrete, Tuck describes a photography exhibit at the Schomburg Center in New York. Stereotypes versus human types.
I love this part of the reading. Walk us through it, because I think it really helps land the plane.
So imagine you walk into the first room, the damage room. It's filled with these grotesque historical caricatures of African Americans, the alligator bait images, Uncle Tom posters.
Just flat, one-dimensional images of mockery or pity.
Exactly. But then you walk into the second room, the desire room. These were the human types. They were old photographs, the daguerreotypes of African Americans from the Victorian era.
And what's the shift in feeling there?
It's profound. These people were posed. They chose their clothes. They chose how to be seen. They look back at the camera with dignity, with complexity. They weren't just reacting to a system of oppression. They were just being.
They were subjects of their own lives.
They were subjects of desire. They had a past and a future that belonged to them. And that is the shift Tuck wants us to make. Stop looking at the stereotype of the victim and start looking at the complex human.
Okay, emotionally, I completely buy that.
Yeah.
But I can hear the pragmatist in my head saying, if I'm working in a conflict zone, isn't focusing on desire a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Soft. Aren't you just glossing over the fact that the house is on fire?
And that is the #1 criticism. Aren't you just in denial? But Tuck tackles this with her storm analogy. She says a desire-based framework is not the song about looking for a silver lining. It is the song about walking through the storm.
I highlighted that line, walking through the storm.
It acknowledges the storm is real. You might get wet, you might get hurt, but it refuses to let the storm be the only interesting thing about the person walking. It says the storm is happening, but I am still here, and I am still creating, and I am still me.
So it's the difference between look at this poor victim in the rain and look at this person navigating the rain.
Precisely. And in the interfaith world, this just changes the entire conversation. Right now, so many dialogues get stuck in what scholars call competitive victimhood.
Oh, I've been in those rooms. My tragedy is bigger than your tragedy. It's a race to the bottom.
It is. And it's a dead end. Because if your only currency is your pain, you can never let it go or you go bankrupt. A desire-based framework flips that. It allows communities to show up as bearers of wisdom. They bring their theology, their humor, their traditions. They show up as what Avery Gordon calls complex personhood.
Complex personhood. Okay, another term we need to pin down. What does that look like in the real world?
It means acknowledging that people are messy and full of contradictions, and that's okay. Tuck shares this story from her colleague, Monique Gachard, that is just perfect, the sneaker line paradox.
Yes. This story really stuck with me. So Monique is working with these youth researchers in the Bronx.
Right. And they spend the whole day doing this incredibly high-level critical work. They're critiquing corporate capitalism, breaking down globalization, analyzing how these systems exploit their communities.
They're sharp, socially conscious critics of the system. And then the sun goes down.
And then the sun goes down, And where do these anti-capitalist warriors go? They go stand in line for hours to buy the new Air Jordan sneakers.
Which are the ultimate symbol of the corporate machine they just spent all day tearing apart.
Exactly. Now, a damage-centered researcher looks at those kids and says, hypocrites, or, false consciousness.
You judge them. You think they failed the test.
Right. But a desire-based framework looked at that and sees texture. The kids knew it was a contradiction. They were at ease with it. They can critique the system and still want the shoes because, in their world, those shoes represent status, style, joy.
It's allowing them to be human, not just a political talking point.
And this sneaker logic, this ability to hold contradictions, is actually life or death in peace building.
Okay, connect those dots for me. How do we get from Air Jordans to peace?
Because people in conflict zones are living the ultimate contradiction. This framework allows us to understand, for instance, a Palestinian imam who is deeply mourning the destruction of his village, but who is also studying Hebrew to read Jewish philosophy in the original.
Which would seem impossible if you only view him as a victim.
Right, or an Israeli rabbi who is grieving a terror attack, but who is also building a local coalition with his Muslim neighbors. It breaks the binary of victim versus aggressor, or broken versus whole.
We are addicted to those binaries, aren't we?
Totally. A scholar named Edward Soja calls the alternative thirding. It's moving beyond either to a third space where multiple truths can exist at once.
So this leads us to the final big concept in the stack. If we aren't just surviving the damage, what are we doing? The term used is survivance. Is that just a fancy word for survival?
No, and this is crucial. It comes from Gerald Vezinor, an Anishinaabe scholar. Survival is just staying alive. It's defensive. It's a reflex.
You survive a car crash. You just hold on tight enough.
Exactly. But survivance is active. Vezinor defines it as a creative, generative, sovereign presence. It means you are creating new ways of being while you stay alive. You aren't just reacting to the oppressor. You are out creating them.
Give us an example of that.
The source material mentions these communities in South Florida, Jewish and Muslim communities who, have plenty of reasons to be at odds given global events.
For sure. The tension must be incredibly high.
A survival mode would be them just issuing press releases condemning violence and then going back to their separate corners. That's damage control.
But they did survivance instead.
They did. They came together to co-author new theological frameworks for coexistence. They were analyzing their scriptures together to find a path forward. They weren't rehearsing their grief. They were generating new wisdom. That is a sovereign act.
So given all of this, Tuck ends her letter with a really radical demand. She calls for a moratorium.
A moratorium on damage-centered research. It's a bold move. She's essentially saying, stop the presses.
Does she mean we just stop doing research? Just stop asking questions and go home?
No, it's not anti-intellectual. It's a call for a timeout, a freeze on the kind of research that just extracts pain for academic tenure or for funding. She wants us to rethink our theories of change. Are we just collecting pain stories, or are we helping a community thrive?
There's a story at the very end of the material that I think sums all this up better than any theory could.
The story from the Australian Parliament in 2008.
Yes. So it was this historic day. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd was offering a formal national apology to Indigenous peoples for the stolen generations.
A massive moment of acknowledging damage. But then the opposition leader, Brendan Nelson, stood up. And he gave this hollow counter-narrative. He started minimizing the impact, making excuses.
The classic yes, but response. Mistakes were made, but let's not get carried away.
Exactly. And the gallery is packed with Indigenous elders and allies. And instead of shouting him down, they did something else. One by one, they stood up and they turned their backs.
They just turned around.
They turned their backs on him, and then they started a slow clap, a rhythmic slow clap. And the sound grew until it literally drowned out the voice of the man speaking at the podium.
Wow. That gives me chills.
Tuck calls this a sovereign act. It wasn't a riot, it was a rejection. They essentially said, we are done listening to a story that defines us by your terms. We are done.
That image,
Yeah.
turning your back on a narrative that doesn't serve you, that really is the core of this entire deep dive.
It is. It's the refusal to be a victim, the refusal to be a statistic. And for
Yeah.
anyone listening, that is the lesson.
So let's bring this home. What's the final takeaway? How do we apply this tomorrow morning?
I think it's this. We have to stop thinking that the only way to get people to care is to show them the blood. We need to look for the desire. We need to look for the human type, not the stereotype.
Because you can pity a victim, but you can only partner with a person.
Beautifully said. You can't build a future on pity. You can only build it on shared hope.
I think that leads us to a really provocative thought to leave our listeners with today.
I've been thinking about this, about that silence that Tuck talks about, the silence when you stop listing your grievances. So here's the question for you. If you stop telling the story of your life or your community through the list of things that have hurt you, what story would be left to tell?
That's a scary question, because for some of us, that list is our armor.
It is terrifying. If you take away the damage, is there anything left? Is that silence just empty? Or is that silence exactly where the real work begins?
A question worth sitting with. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
See you next time.